One of the most common questions or problems I come across with my students is something along the lines of, I've been learning licks, but they don't come up when I improvise, or when they do, they sound really mechanical and contrived. I see this all the time. It's the same set of mistakes that students are making when they encounter this problem. And I think this is the basis of a whole bunch of negative opinions about learning licks. They're not part of the tradition, they destroy jazz, it's all mechanical, you're not going to learn anything from them. This is all true if you are learning them the wrong way and making the common mistakes that a lot of people do. My opinion is that learning licks is a way to internalize jazz language and jazz vocabulary, and it's one of the ways in which you can develop your own language and your own vocabulary. So in this lesson, I want to look at what Monk can teach you about learning licks. It's worth mentioning that this is part of a series on what makes Monk sound like Monk and what you can learn from him. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and the little bell button so you don't miss out. Monk wasn't a lick player per se, like Charlie Parker or Grant Green. What he did have was a very idiosyncratic and unique language and vocabulary, and by studying that, you can see the way in which he is reusing certain ideas and manipulating them to create new language and new ideas. Which, if you learn licks properly, this is something that allows you to do this. So in this video, you're going to learn a 4-step method that I use with my students and myself to internalize licks and get them into your playing so they show up organically when you're improvising, how to avoid the common mistakes that I'd see a lot of students and beginner players making when they're trying to learn licks. And you're going to learn a quite simple but very versatile piece of vocabulary from Monk, which is accessible to players of all levels. You can find PDFs of all the lesson material over on my Patreon, as well as bonus content such as the etude that I've written specifically for this lesson, which shows you how to apply some of these ideas in a real musical context. The links to which are all in the description to this video. So step 1 is to pick and learn how to play a lick that will develop your playing. So find a lick in a recording that you really like and learn that by ear. I'm going to use as an example today a small piece of language from a bigger transcription project that I've been working on. It's a lick from Monk's solo on Blue Monk on the Alone in San Francisco recording. So you want to learn this by ear. This leads to a common mistake that I see a lot of students making, which is they just try and find a transcription that's already been done and learn it from a tab or from notation. The reason you want to do this by ear is because it helps you develop your ear, which is a very important skill when you're not doing that and someone else is doing it for you. They're doing all the heavy lifting. It's going to be hard at first, but the more that you do this, the better that your ear becomes. So you can slow the recording right down if you need to. That often makes it a whole lot easier. The way that I'd like to do this is I like to try and learn how to sing the lick in question before I even pick up my instrument. The advantage of doing that is that you internalize the lick both melodically, rhythmically into your body, and once you've learnt how to sing it and you know the rhythmic pattern of it and whatnot, it actually just makes it a whole lot easier to learn when you pick up your instrument because you've already done half the work. And so then when you do pick up your instrument, you want to learn how to play along with the recording. Again, you can slow it right down. This alludes to another common mistake I see a lot of students making, learning the notes but not the articulation and the feel and the whole swagger of the player that you are trying to transcribe, which is a really, really important part of transcription and learning licks. And you will, again, find that their feel and their phrasing will come up in your playing. So the second step is to analyze. So figuring out what musical elements are important to this lick and understanding how they work. So the first thing that I instantly recognize about this lick is that I've heard it somewhere before, in particular the theme to Straight No Chaser. When you zoom in a bit more, you actually find out that it's a variation on the rhythmic motif to Blue Monk. As I said before, Monk is not a lick player per se, but if you listen to a lot of his recordings, you can find variations on this lick and this vocabulary all throughout. I didn't actually have time to draw up a list, so if you are aware of what I'm talking about or you have particular favorite examples of this, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear about it. So what other things do we notice about this lick? It's ascending chromatically. This lick's being played over the 1 chord, which is a B flat 6 or a B flat 7, depending on who you ask. And it's also a minor lick. So theoretically, it works over the entire progression. This, of course, being a blues in the key of B flat. So, and then the other thing is trying to figure out what notes lead in and out of the lick, which will become more important later and I'll discuss, but it relates to another common mistake, which is analyzing a lick purely academically and not really trying to think about what the lick is telling you to practice and what to work on. Like, what ideas can it give you for developing your own vocabulary and practicing improvising, which I see students do all the time. They analyze the lick, but they just leave it at an analysis and don't ask questions like, what can this music teach me? Or what can this music tell me to do? And then they don't really learn anything from it. And so the solution to this problem is to look at the music and ask what it can tell you to practice, which, based on those features that I identified earlier, one of them was the rhythmic motif that Monk is quoting and varying in various ways, adding notes, subtracting notes, and so on. Another one is the chromaticism, and by extension the leading tones that he's using to construct this lick. And then there's the actual melodic contours of what he's doing. So he's just using a B flat minor triad with some tension notes, such as the 6 and the 9, which sound really killer in my opinion. So the third step is to internalize the lick, which is how you avoid another common mistake, which is that students learn the lick in one key and one position and leave it there, which, if you only learn something in one context, it's only going to work in that one context and it's going to sound mechanical and forced. So the fix is to learn the lick in other keys and other positions. So I think you want to learn the lick all across the fretboard, not just a couple of different positions, because if you learn it only on a couple of string sets, such as or over here, sort of only it limits you to only that part of the fretboard. So you're not going to have as much freedom when you're up around here somewhere and you don't know that you could also play the lick over here or up here or over here. So learn it all across the fretboard, so it allows you to have the most freedom depending on whatever context you're in. And the same applies for learning it in other keys. The ultimate goal is to learn it in all 12 keys, but we should remember that some keys are more important than others. So use keys that are the most commonly used keys in jazz. So obviously this is in B flat. You'd want to learn it, I think, also in F, in C, E flat, A flat. They're just a few of the most commonly used keys. I think you should also learn this over common forms and tunes that you already know. So like over a blues, You could just, so that's over the 1 chord, that's over the 4 chord, that's over the 6 chord, that's over the 2 chord, and that's over the 5 chord. The other thing you want to do in order to internalize it is to mix the lick with other vocabulary that you have, which I call this the sandwiching method, which is why it's important to know where the lick begins and ends, because that way you know how to fit other vocabulary around it. So one way to do this is to start by trying to play the lick and then improvise or play some vocabulary after the lick. So basically, like, you play the lick and then you improvise something after it and try and make it different vocabulary or different phrasing. So you're actually practicing how to use that pre-existing lick, but also improvising after it. You repeat that process with the lick, like leading into it. And then try and combine them both together, so leading both in and out. That's why it's important to learn where the phrase begins and ends, because it allows you to figure out how to, attach it to other vocabulary or improvise around it and use it in different contexts. Which leads to the fourth and final step, which is to transform the lick, turn it into your own musical language and vocabulary. This is how you avoid another common mistake, which I see a lot, which is trying to play the lick exactly as it appeared in the original. This is why it sounds really mechanical and contrived when a lot of people try and use licks when soloing and improvising. This is because you're not speaking proper sentences, you're just quoting someone else with no thought about the context that you're playing it in. So of course it's just going to sound really crude and really forced. This is also a way to avoid another common mistake, which is to see licks as indivisible pieces of language. They're obviously made up of parts, different rhythmic parts, different melodic parts, and you can use any of those parts independently. So by transforming the lick and making it your own, taking the different parts, modifying them, transforming them, you're actually developing your own language and your own vocabulary. And you can see that in what Monk was doing with the rhythmic motif of Blue Monk. But this is exactly what we're going to do here, which is look at what this vocabulary is telling us to practice, and using that as an inspiration for our own musical ideas. So one idea is taking the rhythmic motif that Monk is using, setting that as fixed, but varying the notes. So I'd repeat that in other parts of the fretboard, in other keys. You can also try and adapt it over different elements of the blues form. So over the 4 chord, over the sharp 4 diminished, over the 6 chord, over the 2 chord, over the 5 chord. Also thinking about what other tunes you can play this over. I was just demonstrating that over the changes of a blues. You could pick standards, repeat the same process. The flip side of that, instead of fixing the rhythmic motif and allowing yourself to practice whatever different sets of pitches over it, is that you could only be able to use the pitches that Monk uses from the lick, but then able to vary the rhythmic motif in any way that you like. You could subtract notes but keep the same rhythmic motif. You could add notes to it. You can isolate different elements from the lick and use that to generate ideas. There's that leap to the 6 that sounds really cool. You can move that around. Another musical element that the lick alludes to practicing is chromaticism and leading tones. So you could use the rhythmic motif to chromatically target different chord tones. I could use leading tones to target different chord tones using that same motif. And so what you're doing in this last step is that you are actually generating your own licks, your own language, your own vocabulary from that original raw material that you've transcribed. And that's really the whole point of studying Monk, and anyone else for that matter. It's not to just play exactly as they did, which is obviously important for feel, as I mentioned earlier. But what you're trying to do is to try and understand the musical thinking behind the particular piece of language that you are trying to assimilate. You're trying to understand how that musician thinks and then use that as an inspiration for your own thinking and your own playing. So don't feel like you have to tackle all of those transformation exercises all at once. I'd start at the beginning and just work your way through them, build them up until you feel more competent before moving on to any of the other steps. All the examples from this lesson are available as a PDF over on my Patreon or buy me a coffee. Over on my Patreon, you'll find an etude that I wrote specifically built out of musical language that's purely generated from that original lick. And I'll also talk you through how I constructed it and some other strategies for internalizing that vocabulary. So you can find them in the links in the description below. So that's my 4-step method for learning how to internalize licks and how to avoid the common mistakes that a lot of students make when learning licks. If you do these 4 things properly, I guarantee you it will stop sounding like mechanical quotes and it'll start sounding like genuine vocabulary and language that is your own. I've seen this in many students. I've seen it in my own playing. It's something that I work on all the time, constantly, as a way to develop my own language and vocabulary. Monk is the perfect case study in my opinion because his vocabulary, whilst having a lot of commonalities to, bebop language and whatnot, it's just distinctly and uniquely his own, which is what we aspire to as musicians, developing our own sound, our own vocabulary, our own distinct and unique things to say, which are rooted in the tradition of this music. There's probably a whole bunch of other different strategies for internalizing licks and transforming them that I've missed. If I did, I'd love to hear what some of those are, whether that's something that you practice yourself or something that you teach. Drop a comment below. Like I said before, over on my Patreon, you can find PDFs of all the examples as well as an etude study and video that walks you through how I constructed that etude. It also is a way that you can support what I do. It takes a lot of time and commitment to make videos like this, and for less than a price of a coffee, you can gain access to all my PDFs from my previous lessons and bonus material that I provide to my Patreons. As I also mentioned earlier, this is part of a series on what makes Monk sound like Monk. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe and hit the bell button so you can stay up to date with any future content. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and you found it useful. Tell me what you think about it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.